Well, hey, welcome. I'm Chris Shandrow, the pastor at Compass. Really glad you're with me today. Years ago, if you'd asked a kid what they wanted to be when they grow up, the top answers you would have heard would be astronaut, doctor, or teacher. A recent poll of young people from Gen Z found that now 1 in 4 of them want to be influencers. 25% of young people say that they want to make a career building influence on social media. Now, for people who were alive before social media was a thing, that sounds crazy. But did you know that influencer marketing is a $21 billion industry? And the reason that kids wanted to be astronauts and teachers back then is because then those people had outsized influence. Today, we've just kind of cut out that secondary career path and we've just made influencing a job. Influence, particularly on social media, it's a powerful thing in our world. And you may not know this, but if you're a musician who's looking for a record deal or a writer who's looking to get a book published, it doesn't matter if you have the best songs in the world or if you've written the great American novel. The first question that they're going to ask you is this: how big is your following on social media? The quality of your art is less important than the amount of followers you have or how big your influence is. If you don't have followers, you're not going to get a deal. And that's why in the 80s, you could be a successful recording artist and still look like a regular person. Look at this. This is Elton John. Could you possibly imagine a guy going bald like that selling any records today? I wish I lived in that world, but I don't. This is Krista Berg. His song Lady in Red went to number 3 on the charts in 1987. He looks like a guy who tells dad jokes to the servers at Applebee's so that he can embarrass his teenage daughter. And finally, this is my favorite. This is Rick Astley. He looks more like the captain of the robotics club than the greatest pop star who ever walked the planet. These guys all made great music in their time, but in today's world, influence matters more than the art you make. The amount of followers you have is more important than whether you write great books. Your social media reach gives you more political power than your education or your experience. Your tweets can get you more votes than your knowledge of foreign policy. The rules of greatness and power and influence, these rules have changed. And so today I want to talk about how to be a great influencer. And to do that, I want to look at the life of Jesus. Not because Jesus was a great influencer, because I don't think he was. I'd rather look at Jesus as an example of how not to do it. By today's standards, Jesus would probably be a terrible influencer. He even struggled at it 2,000 years ago. Look at John 6, verse 66. At this point, many of his disciples turned away and deserted him. Jesus did build a following, but he regularly did and said things that caused people to unfollow him. That is not how to be an influencer. Today, I want to take a look at how to be a successful influencer by looking at 3 ways that Jesus, I think, got it totally wrong. And so let's start by taking a look at Matthew 20, verse 17. As Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside privately, and he told them what was going to happen to him. Listen, he said, we're going up to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and the teachers of religious law. They will sentence him to die, and then they will hand him over to the Romans to be mocked, flogged with a whip, and crucified. But on the 3rd day, he'll be raised from the dead. This is actually the 3rd time recorded in the Gospel of Matthew that Jesus predicted his death, and he was pretty clear about it. He said that he would be turned over to the hands of the Jewish leaders and the Roman authorities, and that they would kill him. But the disciples didn't get it. And maybe they thought that Jesus was speaking in riddles like he often did, or maybe they just didn't want to hear it because they believed that as the Messiah, Jesus was going to lead them into Jerusalem to end the Roman occupation of Israel and then rule as king over a new Jewish nation. And a dead Messiah can't do that. Either way, what Jesus said here, it had no influence on his disciples, no matter how many times he said it. And I think this is the first thing Jesus got wrong. And this is our first takeaway as well. If you want to be an influencer, tell people what they want to hear. Find an audience and feed them a healthy diet of what they like. You cannot build and keep followers by telling them what they don't want to hear. You got to post content that makes them feel good, content that makes them feel like they're right about how they see the world, and that sticking with you, that they're on the right team. Telling them that your whole endeavor is going to eventually fail is not a winning strategy. They want to feel like they're hitching their wagon to the right horse, which means you got to tell them what they want to hear. So that's the first thing. Now let's keep going to see how else Jesus got it wrong in Matthew 20, verse 20. Then the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons. She knelt respectfully to ask a favor. "What's your request?" he asked. And she replied, "In your kingdom, please let my 2 sons sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." Now, this request, it tracks because when you have influence over other people, they want to get close to you so they can get some of it for themselves. Now, I don't know if James and John sent their mom to ask Jesus this question or if she went on her own, but she asks Jesus to give her sons the positions of greatest authority in his kingdom when he becomes the king. Now, this is exactly what you want as an influencer, because the closer people want to be to you, then the more influence you have over them. So that's a good thing. It continues here in verse 22. But Jesus answered by saying to them, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I'm about to drink?" "Oh, yes," they replied, "we are able." And Jesus told them, "You will indeed drink from my bitter cup. But I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. My Father has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen." Now, if you're paying attention to this, you can probably see where Jesus got off track here. I mean, he told James and John that if they follow him, they're going to suffer. Just like Jesus said that he was going to suffer. Now, telling your followers that they're going to suffer is bad business. Nobody wants to suffer. Now, that being said, people might be willing to suffer a little bit if they're going to get what they want out of it. And James and John, they might have been willing to suffer if the payoff was to get those number 2 and 3 spots in the new kingdom of Israel. But Jesus, he makes things worse by telling them that he couldn't even guarantee them that. Which brings us to our second takeaway. If you want to be a good influencer, guarantee people good outcomes. Nobody wants to follow a personal trainer who tells them these workouts are going to be painful. They're going to be brutal. And you're going to work so hard that you might puke. And at the end of it, you might be in better shape, but I really can't guarantee it. That is crazy. Nobody would follow that trainer. Who would do the work if you aren't guaranteed what you want out of it? Jesus is telling James and John that even if they suffer to follow him, he still can't guarantee them a good spot at the table. And that's just not how to do it. A good influencer gains and keeps influence by guaranteeing people good outcomes if they follow. Let's keep going in verse 24. When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the 2 brothers. So Jesus called them together, and he said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and that their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This is interesting because here, Jesus actually acknowledges what successful influencers do to gain and keep their influence. I mean, he said that the rulers of the Gentiles, their high officials, they lord it over their followers and exercise authority over them. Everyone knew what Jesus meant when he said Gentiles. He meant the Romans, the Roman government that occupied and subjugated the Jewish people. And guess what? The Romans, they were successful. Their methods worked. They were in control and had more power and influence than anyone else. What the disciples expected of Jesus, who they believed was the Messiah, they They expected that he was going to switch positions with Rome, that the kingdom Jesus was going to put in place would defeat Rome and take power and exercise authority over them, that a new nation of Israel would lord it over the Gentiles who had oppressed them for so long. But Jesus said it wasn't going to be like that among his followers. Rather than use their influence to take power and control for themselves, they would instead use it to serve others. And not just to serve, but to become like slaves. This is a rookie move for Jesus because nobody wants to follow an influencer who tells his people to be slaves. People want an influencer who makes their lives better, not worse, easier instead of harder. Because, and here's the third takeaway, if you want to be a good influencer, make people feel in control. People want to be in control of their lives, and we want to follow influencers who help us feel like the power to do that. We want to follow influencers on TikTok who tell us how to control our beauty with makeup tutorials and control our mental health with counseling videos. Influencers who show us how to get control over our schedules, how to clean our house, how to manage our finances, who show us how to manage our marriages, our kids, and how to exert control over our relationships with people by setting boundaries around toxic people. We want influencers who help us feel in control of our comfort and entertainment by feeding us the things that we want to consume. We want to be the masters of our own lives, not the slaves in someone else's. And a good influencer makes me feel like I'm the most important person in the world, not a slave. A good influencer tells people what they want to hear, they guarantee good outcomes, and they make people feel in control. People will follow that influencer. And Jesus seemed to get all of this wrong. He said things that made people feel uncomfortable. He guaranteed that in this life there would be suffering. And he said that his followers would not only not be in control, but that they should live as servants and slaves, giving up their power and comfort for the good of others. By any normal standard, Jesus would have been a pretty lousy influencer, which is strange because Jesus is probably the most influential person in all of human history. You don't have to be a Christian to know who he is or some of the things that he taught. More books have been written about Jesus than any other person who has ever lived. And whether you think it's good or bad, his influence has impacted the world more than anyone else. So why is that? I think it's because Jesus wasn't chasing influence. He was pursuing purpose. He wasn't building a kingdom of power where the people of Israel could gain control. He was building a kingdom of purpose that would bring healing and restoration to a creation that was damaged by sin and brokenness. His purpose wasn't to take power from his oppressors, but to end oppression everywhere, to put an end to the corruption of sin, evil, and injustice through his life, death, and resurrection. And then inviting his followers to take that same path of purpose by standing against injustice, caring for the marginalized, and bringing restoration between us and God. What Jesus is doing in the world and in our lives, it can't be accomplished through influence over others or by gaining control. It only comes by releasing those pursuits and instead becoming servants. Not by being powerful and known, but by being unknown and working for the good of others. We find life in Jesus because, and this is our real takeaway, because Jesus offers us purpose. He had purpose and he's offering it to us. The thing about influence is that it's fleeting. I mean, Rome had more influence than any nation that ever existed. But where is it now? It's gone. And influence is the same. It blows away like smoke in a breeze the second that it doesn't offer people what they want anymore. But purpose lasts. Purpose isn't even broken by suffering and failure. And the world may not always need influencers, but it will always need people of purpose. It will always need servants, people who are willing to do the hard and sometimes thankless work of striving to make things better for those in need, to expand the kingdom of God into a world that may not understand or appreciate it, just like it didn't understand and appreciate Jesus. Jesus has enormous influence, but only because he didn't pursue it. He pursued purpose, and he invites us to do the same. Maybe you're hearing this and you feel like your life is out of control. Your marriage, your finances, your kids, your relationships, nothing is working the way you want it to. And you've been trying everything to just get some control, but nothing's working. I can tell you right now, Jesus isn't offering power over your life. And he won't tell you what you want to hear or guarantee good outcomes or make you feel in control. But he does promise that when you seek his kingdom first and take the position of a servant, that he will take care of everything else. Maybe you're hearing this and you feel like you are in control of your life. I mean, you got everything buttoned down. It's exactly where you want it to be. And you're doing everything the right way. But in spite of all of that, you're still unfulfilled. You have influence over the big things in your life of money, relationships, your career, your comfort. But something's still missing because you have influence, but no purpose. And the reason people for centuries have been willing to suffer and even die for following Jesus is because he offers a life of purpose, a life of servanthood where meeting the needs of others brings more joy and fulfillment than being in control ever could. He offers a life of working to see all creation restored from the brokenness of evil and injustice. Wherever you are, Jesus is inviting you to a life of purpose, fulfillment, and meaning. And it all starts by asking and answering two questions. First, how can I serve others? Once you know the answer to that question, the rest is easy. Just go and do it. And the second thing to ask yourself is this: am I willing to follow Jesus and his way of living? Am I willing to let go of control and instead embrace Jesus' way of being in the world? At Compass, we say it this way: we want to live like Jesus lived, think like he thought, and do what he taught. That's the life God is inviting you to. And my hope is that your answer is yes. So may we live like Jesus lived, think like he thought, and do what he taught. May we pursue purpose rather than influence and control. May we search out opportunities to serve others, even if it means becoming slaves to the work of lifting up those in need. And as we pursue his purpose, as we give up being first to become last and serving others, may God transform our lives and transform our world. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.